The police dog with no pedigree just shattered everything they thought they knew. They laughed when she entered, mud on her boots, a dented truck. A dog with no papers, no lineage, no chance. But what they didn't know was that this dog once kept a war medic breathing through the night, that he sensed panic before it rose, that his training came not from commands but from love. Koda wasn't bred to win ribbons. He was born to notice what others miss. This is the story of a broken veteran, her grief-stricken granddaughter, and a dog the world gave up on. A dog who would one day walk into the most elite canine competition, not to perform tricks, but to show what empathy really looks like. And in a world obsessed with pedigree and profit, sometimes the loudest bark comes from the quietest dog. The wind cut low through the scrubland like it was looking for something it lost. It whistled through broken porch slats, rattled a half-hinged screen door, and clawed at the rusted tin roof with fingers of dust and grit. Above it all, a faded sign still hung by one crooked nail. Rhea's Family Ranch, Est, 1958. But whatever that name used to stand for had long since crumbled with the paint. Camilla Reyes stepped out of the pickup and onto the gravel with the slow, measured caution of someone who had learned pain by repetition. Her right knee, still riddled with shrapnel fragments the VA hadn't removed, clicked slightly as she shifted her weight. The soles of her boots found purchase in the dry dirt, but her footing inside, that was another story entirely. The house loomed, sun-bleached and bowing under its own weight. Shingles curled like dead leaves. The front door, once white, was now a palette of chipped grays and grime. She remembered it being smaller, or maybe she had just come back too big, too different, too full of things she couldn't leave behind. She stood still for a moment, not out of sentiment, but calculation. What did she expect to feel? Relief? Regret? Maybe it was just emptiness now, the kind that stretched between one heartbeat and the next when you wake up from a nightmare and don't know where you are. Her fingers hovered over the front door's brass knob. Cold, like everything else she carried. The living room smelled like time had been holding its breath. Dust blanketed the furniture like ash after a long war. Plastic covers still sheathed the old sofa, and faded family portraits hung crookedly above the cold fireplace. Her mother's knitted throw lay untouched on the armrest, a time capsule of a life that stopped while Camilla's had simply broken. She dropped her duffel by the entryway. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, a dull punctuation to her return. No welcome, no voice, no comfort. Camilla moved room to room with the caution of a soldier clearing a hostile zone, though she knew no one else had been here in months. Every room was a memory grenade. Her father's den, filled with the smell of cedar and pipe smoke, the kitchen table where letters from Afghanistan used to land, creased and stained with worry. The hallway mirror caught her reflection, and she paused, not out of vanity, but surprise. The woman in the glass was lean and hollow-cheeked, her brown hair streaked more gray than she remembered. A pink scar, jagged and wide, trailed from just below her collarbone down to her ribs and around her side, like a warning etched in skin. She looked into her own eyes and found the same thing that stared back at her in every dream. Survivor, but barely. She opened the bedroom drawer last. It still stuck halfway, just like it used to. Nestled inside, beneath a tattered stack of discolored letters, lay the thing she hadn't wanted to see, and couldn't forget was there. A revolver. Her father's. Cold steel, worn handle, loaded. She stared at it for a long moment, then closed the drawer. Not today. Not yet. The days blurred, morning coffee was silent, Meals were mechanical, fences needed mending, and the goats had somehow survived, though the ranch barely breathed. Camilla forced herself into motion, the way a wind-up toy jerks into life start, stumble, repeat. She tried the breathing exercises, sometimes. She took the meds when she could stomach them, and on the nights she couldn't sleep, which was most, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, watching shadows spin, pretending that time was just something she had to wait out. But the dreams still came, always the same. Screams, smoke, a boy with no lower jaw, the sound of rotors overhead as she held gauze to someone's throat and screamed for morphine. Her own breathing in the dream always sounded like she was drowning, in blood, in guilt, in silence. One night she woke up with the pillow soaked through and the taste of dust and gunpowder in her mouth. She sat up, shaking. No thunder outside. No reason for her heart to race. No bombs. But her chest didn't know that. She needed air. Camilla pulled on a flannel and boots and stepped outside. The desert night was the only thing that felt honest. It didn't try to comfort. It didn't pretend. The moon hung low and swollen, casting silver across the mesquite. Crickets buzzed in dry rhythm, and somewhere a coyote yipped a lonely, unanswered cry. She didn't know where her feet were taking her until she reached the canyon rim. Timber Ravine. When she was young, her father used to warn her away from it. "Too steep, bad footing, coyotes down there," he'd said. But standing at the edge now, it just looked quiet. She let her shoulders fall, the weight of everything, war, family, grief, pressing down. One wrong step and it would all be over. No more flashbacks. No more empty beds. No more guilt for being the one who came home. But just as her heels shifted near the edge, a sound, soft, fragile, almost mist beneath the wind, a whimper. Camilla's breath caught. She turned her head, scanning. There. Halfway down a narrow rock ledge, tangled in bramble and nearly invisible beneath mud, was a shape. Fur, maybe. Mottled gray. It didn't move until the whimper came again, this time more desperate. She crouched low, instinct overriding despair. Years of battlefield triage returned to her body like muscle memory. "Hold on," she muttered, grabbing a rope from a nearby fence post. Her boots scraped down the side of the ravine, her legs screaming at every step. The dog didn't move. One eye was swollen shut, its ribs like blades under skin. Torn pads, blood crusted around old scabs and new gashes. But its gaze, what little was left of it, met hers. Not fear, resignation. Camilla bent down and murmured, "Not tonight. You're not dying out here alone." She wrapped him gently in her flannel shirt, lifted his near weightless body, and carried him up the ravine like she had carried soldiers out of fire. Not for glory, just for one more chance. The desert at night was different. It wasn't empty, it breathed, not with sound, but with memory. It was in the way the wind moved through brittle sagebrush, like fingers brushing old scars, in how the moonlight settled over the ridges, bathing everything in a silver so clean it felt sacred. Camilla walked alone, wrapped in an oversized army jacket and silence. Her boots moved over cracked earth and gravel like they were tracing a path she hadn't agreed to follow. She didn't know why she'd stepped outside, only that the walls of the house had started closing in again. Sometimes it wasn't even the dreams. It was the quiet afterward. That long, yawning stillness between a racing heart and the realization you'd woken up again. She hadn't told anyone. There was no one left to tell. But some nights, the thought crept in like smoke under a door. What if you just disappeared? No notes, no drama, just gone. The desert had a way of making people disappear. The gravel thinned beneath her feet as she reached the ridge where the land dropped suddenly into timber ravine. This place used to terrify her as a child. The kind of fear that came not from stories or snakes, but from something older, an instinct that told you, there's no bottom here, only silence. She stood at the edge. The moonlight revealed the ravine's jagged throat rock walls, chiseled by centuries of wind and regret. The canyon swallowed sound. It swallowed light. Her breath caught. One more step, just one. She imagined the air rushing past, the sudden weightlessness. Then nothing. No more guilt. No more VA visits. No more counting pills like borrowed time. And then a sound, barely audible, faint, raw. A whimper. Camilla blinked. It wasn't her mind playing tricks. She heard it again, torn, trembling, carried on the wind, not human, not echo. She squinted down toward the canyon wall, eyes scanning until they locked on a small, broken shape wedged against a narrow, muddy ledge, maybe 20 feet down. Fur, blood, barely moving. Her breath caught, this time not from despair, but instinct. Combat medic mode, buried under months of withdrawal, snapped to life. "Hold on," she whispered. She didn't know to whom, maybe to the dog, maybe to herself. She scanned the area. A fallen fence post lay nearby, still wrapped in a coil of rope. She tied it around an old cedar trunk, her hands working with calm precision, even as her pulse thundered in her ears. With one deep breath, Camilla lowered herself down the ravine. Her muscles screamed at every shift, her leg locking up in protest, but she pushed through. Gravel skidded beneath her boots as she half slid, half descended toward the ledge. The closer she got, the clearer the image became. A German shepherd, barely more than skin and bone. His fur was matted with dried blood and mud, one paw twisted unnaturally beneath him. His breathing was shallow, eyes glassy. But they tracked her. He didn't flinch, didn't growl, didn't beg. He simply watched. Something in that gaze pierced her. Not fear, not pain, just the kind of resignation that came from being left too many times. "I see you," she whispered. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle him. "You're not alone anymore." Her hand hovered above his ribs, each one sharp under the skin. She counted the breaths. Weak, labored. He was running on nothing but instinct now. Camilla shrugged off her jacket, wrapped it around his trembling frame. He made a sound something between a sigh and a sob, as if the warmth shocked him more than the cold. "It's okay. I got you." She looked up. The climb back would be brutal, but not impossible. Camilla tightened the rope around her waist, pulled the limp weight of the shepherd gently into her arms, and began the ascent. Every inch clawed at her body. Sweat poured down her spine. Her leg throbbed, but she moved because she knew the feeling of being left behind, and she refused to let it happen again. At the top, she collapsed on her side, gasping for air. The shepherd lay motionless beside her, his breath thin but still there. Still there. She cradled his head gently, feeling the scar tissue beneath his ear. Some of the wounds were old. Others, not even scabbed over yet. What had he crawled away from? Who had left him to die? She didn't ask aloud. The desert didn't like questions. She rose, scooped him into her arms again, and began the slow walk back to the ranch. The sky was lightening on the horizon now, streaks of lavender and ash painting over the black. Dawn was coming. As she stepped onto the porch, the first rays of sun brushed the edge of the house. She looked down at the bundle in her arms. "You made it through the night," she murmured. "That's more than most." She opened the door, crossed the threshold, and whispered to no one. "That's all either of us gets. One more shot." The old ranch house wasn't ready for a patient. The tiles in the kitchen were cracked. The tap dripped unevenly. The counters were scattered with unopened mail and dusty coffee cups. But for now it was a makeshift triage center, because that's what Camilla Reyes knew how to build when there was nothing left but instinct and a heartbeat slipping away. She laid the battered German shepherd down on a blanket spread across the floor. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't enough. But it was warm. It was soft. And it was now. Blood matted his fur, crusted in tangled patches along his haunches and chest. Camilla crouched beside him, heart thrumming with the quiet dread that came not from panic, but from knowing too much. She fetched a basin of warm water and began to clean him gently, one wound at a time. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice low and steady. "You don't get to give up before I do." The shepherd didn't move, but his eyes tracked her slowly. Not afraid, just tired, like some part of him had already decided he didn't belong in this world, and she was late to convince him otherwise. Camilla cut away the fur around a deep gash in his side and cleaned the wound, biting back her own wince as he whimpered, barely. She had done this before, on friends, on strangers, on kids too young to shave. But doing it here, on a kitchen floor with a dog who'd never been asked if he wanted to fight for his life, that was different. A small bottle of leftover antibiotics from her own recovery sat in the back of the cabinet. She measured the dose carefully. His weight was low, too low, but she made a guess and injected it near his flank. "You're not going to die in this damn kitchen," she muttered. "Not after I climbed down that damn ravine for you." He gave a faint twitch of his ear. Camilla paused. A reaction. That was enough to keep going. By late morning, the sun spilled through the cracked blinds in streaks of dusty gold. The shepherd was wrapped in one of her dad's old wool blankets, his breathing shallow but more rhythmic now. She'd placed a bowl of water nearby and dabbed his gums with a soaked cloth when he wouldn't drink. The infection hadn't taken over completely. Yet. Camilla sat beside him, back pressed against the lower cabinets, her knees drawn up, fatigue finally catching up. But she didn't sleep, not yet. Instead, she looked at him. His paws were large, rough with scars. His ears, one nicked, the other alert twitched occasionally in his sleep. His coat, though filthy, held hints of dark sable, rich and complex beneath the grime. Whatever he had been before, stray, working dog, abandoned pet, it didn't matter now. He was here. So was she. She reached out and ran her fingers gently down his side. "Storm like you," she murmured. "Silent. Out of nowhere. Leaves everything changed." She glanced toward the window. Rain was coming again, the kind that whispered across the desert like it had a secret. "Koda," she said aloud. The name tasted right, heavy and soft. "That's what I'll call you. After the storm." The shepherd stirred, ever so slightly, like something in him recognized the name before even she did. As evening fell, Camilla moved him into the living room, lighting the old fireplace for the first time in years. The flames caught slow, like reluctant hope. She laid the blanket closer to the hearth and placed a water bowl within reach. Koda's breathing was steadier now, still shallow but present. That was all she needed. She stayed near him, curled up on the couch with her father's old quilt. Every so often, she'd glance at him to make sure his chest still rose and fell, to be sure he hadn't slipped away, while her eyes wandered. The house, for once, didn't feel so empty. Outside, the wind tapped against the windows like it wanted in. Coyotes cried far off in the hills, but here, inside these fragile walls, there was only warmth and breath. Camilla didn't remember when she fell asleep, but for the first time in weeks, she did. And Koda was still breathing beside her when the sun came up. It started with routine, not healing, not hope, just the comfort of rhythm. Camilla rose each morning before the sun breached the edge of the desert. The chill still clung to the floorboards. Her breath fogged in the kitchen. The coffee maker sputtered. These were Constance's small anchors in a world that had stopped making sense. Her boots waited by the back door, scuffed, dust-caked, and reliable. Next to them now sat another pair of eyes. Koda had taken to sleeping just inside the mudroom. Never in the way, never imposing, just near. Near enough to feel like she wasn't entirely alone. At first she'd thought it was chance. A dog resting close to the one who brought him in from the edge. But then came the moments that made her stop questioning. The way he sat up at 3:14 a.m. exactly every night, just seconds before she startled awake from a nightmare. The way he walked beside her in silence as she paced the yard afterward, never asking for affection, never flinching at the tremble in her hands. The way he pressed his body into her thigh, firm and unmoving, when she froze one afternoon at the sound of a nail gun from a distant ranch. The pressure, the grounding, the presence, like he knew. The days unfolded in measured tasks. Check the water pump, repair the south fence, scrape old feed from the barn troughs. Camilla moved on autopilot, and Koda matched her every step, not as a shadow, but as an echo, always a half-beat behind, always watching. He didn't beg, he didn't bark. But when she reached for the hammer and her hand hesitated mid-air, he nudged her elbow gently, like reminding her, one thing at a time. At first it unnerved her, how intuitive he was, but the discomfort slowly bled into something steadier. Trust. By the end of the first week, Koda had claimed the space beside her workbench in the shed. By the second week, he followed her to the mailbox, half a mile down the dirt road, and back. He paused only once, at the sight of a large crow perched on a fence post. Camilla noticed the way his body tensed, eyes locked, tail still. She made a soft whistle. He looked back at her, ears twitching. Then he moved forward again. It wasn't obedience. It was something deeper. Agreement. Nights were the hardest. They always were. Camilla still couldn't sleep more than a few hours at a time. But now, when she jolted awake, breath ragged, throat tight from invisible screams, Koda was already there. One paw on the edge of her bed. No sound, no judgment. Sometimes he'd rest his head near her knees until the shaking stopped. Other times he simply sat in the hallway, staring into the dark, like he was guarding a line only he could see. Camilla began placing a bowl of water at the foot of the stairs each night, without thinking, and every morning it was empty. One afternoon, while mending a broken slat on the chicken coop, she cut her finger. Just a small slice, but deep. The blood welled fast. Camilla dropped the pliers and stepped back, vision narrowing. It was like stepping into a tunnel. Hot sand behind her eyes. screams that didn't belong to chickens. But before the spiral took her, Koda was there. He pressed his chest to hers, not hard, just enough weight to say, "Now, not then." She dropped to her knees, letting the hammer fall. Her breath hitched. Koda didn't move. He stayed there until the red faded from her vision, until she could remember where she was, who she was. By week's end, a new rhythm formed, boots by the door, bowl by the bed. Bark at the back gate precisely at dusk, one warning to the coyotes, never a second. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. One night, as the wind howled across the tin roof and the fire in the hearth crackled low, Camilla sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against the couch. Koda lay beside her, his head on his paws. "I used to think the silence would kill me," she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. "Now I think it's the only thing holding me together." Koda didn't lift his head, but his tail gave one soft thump. Camilla looked toward the window. Outside, the world remained vast, untamed, indifferent. But inside this crooked old house, with its scars and its ghosts, two living beings kept showing up, every morning, every night. That was something. Maybe it wasn't healing, but it was living. Camilla heard the car before she saw it, dust curling in the side mirror like a quiet storm as it made its way up the winding gravel road. She stood on the porch, mug in hand, not because she was ready, but because there was nowhere else to stand. The child in the back seat didn't move when the vehicle stopped, just stared. Through the window. Through the years. Through whatever was broken inside her. The social worker stepped out first. Polite smile. Clipboard. Too many lines around the eyes for someone who clearly had to explain tragedies for a living. "She didn't want to go anywhere else," the woman said. "Not with her dad's side. Said she remembered your face once. From a birthday." Camilla nodded. Just once. Then the door opened and Maya stepped out like the wind had carved her not born, but weathered down into something sharp and too quiet. 14. But her eyes weren't. She didn't speak at first. Camilla didn't expect her to. She just led her up the steps, offered her a room with clean sheets and an unopened dresser, and set a folded sweatshirt on the edge of the bed. Koda padded in and sat at the door, watching. Not wagging, not pushing. Just watching. Like he could feel how close to the edge Maya really was. She didn't pet him, didn't look away either. Camilla caught the way her fingers clenched the strap of her duffel bag, not because it was heavy, but because it was the last thing in the world that still felt like hers. The first meal was silent. Camilla made grilled cheese, not because it was nutritious, but because it didn't ask questions. Maya picked at the crust, ate 3 bites, drank half a glass of milk. That was a victory. Camilla sat across from her, pretending to read the back of a cereal box, unsure what the hell a grandmother was supposed to say to a child who just buried her mother. How do you build a bridge when both sides are drowning? That night, the silence in the house felt different. Not heavier, just doubled. Camilla lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to footsteps from the room down the hall. Light. Uneven. Then nothing. Then a door creaked open. And then it closed again. The next morning, Koda was lying just outside Maya's door, head down, ears up. He hadn't slept in his usual spot. Camilla tried small gestures, left a book of poetry on the windowsill, poured her cocoa instead of coffee, told her how the chickens were named after 90s country singers because her dad had a weird sense of humor. Maya didn't laugh, but she listened. Camilla could feel it, like the way a cracked window feels wind without ever fully opening. One evening, as the sun pulled the sky into gold and purple threads, Camilla found Maya sitting in the barn. Koda lay beside her, tail flicking gently against the dirt. Maya didn't touch him, but her foot rested just near his flank, an unspoken tether. Camilla leaned against the doorframe, not wanting to break the moment. "You don't have to talk," she said softly, "but if you ever want to scream into the canyon, that's allowed." Maya looked up, her face unreadable. "I tried," she whispered. "Nothing came out." Camilla stepped inside, sat down beside her, not too close, just enough. "Sometimes that means your heart's still frozen," she murmured. "Sometimes it just means the scream is still becoming words." Maya said nothing, but for the first time her shoulders slumped, like she'd been holding up too much for too long. That night Camilla found a drawing on the kitchen table. Pencil sketch, rough, shaky, but detailed. It was of Koda, sleeping, with one eye barely open, and underneath, in faint pencil marks, still watching. Camilla touched the paper, breath caught. It wasn't a sentence, but it was a beginning. The 4th of July arrived not with celebration, but with the subtle ache of dread. Camilla had marked it on the calendar, not because she planned to celebrate, but because she needed to be ready. She told Maya they'd stay in that night. No sparklers, no parades, just grilled chicken, potato salad, and a quiet evening in the barn with the doors closed tight. Maya didn't object. She never did. The sky was still pale blue when the first distant crack split the air. It wasn't even dark yet. Some kid on the next ridge had jumped the gun. Camilla flinched, not visibly, not dramatically. But her fingers wrapped around the garden hose, tightened until her knuckles blanched. Koda stood from the porch without a sound, his eyes locked on her, watching. "Inside?" Camilla murmured. They ate early. Maya barely touched her plate. By 8:45 the sun had slipped below the rim of the hills, and the first official boom rolled across the ranch like thunder breaking open the past. Camilla had made it to the living room. That was her first mistake. She'd just turned off the radio when a cluster of explosions lit up the night sky through the window, red, white, and gold, screaming across the darkness. Another boom, then another, fast, erratic, too close. It wasn't sound anymore. It was time travel. She wasn't in the living room. She was in Tikrit, in a med tent, blood in her gloves, shrapnel in her thigh, a boy screaming for his mother even after his lungs collapsed, the generator cutting out, then the mortar hit, and then, crack. Camilla's knees gave out. She didn't even hear herself fall. She came to on the hardwood, curled against the corner of the couch, gasping like she'd surfaced too fast from deep water. There was pressure on her chest. Steady. Not crushing, just firm. Anchoring. Koda. One paw across her collarbone, his head near her face, nose against her temple. Her hands shook. Her eyes darted. But he didn't move. Not until her breath started matching his. When the room stopped spinning and the flashes became just light again, Camilla blinked, realized they weren't alone. Maya stood in the doorway, still, silent, barefoot on the wooden floor. Her eyes wide, but not with fear, with recognition, with memory. She didn't speak, didn't rush forward. She just stepped carefully into the room, sat down beside the couch close, but not touching. Camilla turned her head, shame clawing at her throat. I didn't want you to see that." Maya looked at her, and in the half-dark, her voice came out soft, clear. "I saw it in my mom." Camilla's breath caught. "She used to hide in the bathtub," Maya added, "when the garbage truck came." Koda shifted. His tail brushed Maya's ankle. Maya didn't flinch. The rest of the fireworks raged outside, bright and pointless, like a war fought for noise alone. Inside, 3 figures sat in the quiet: a grandmother, a girl, and a dog. And for the first time since Maya had arrived, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like shared space. Later that night, Camilla sat on the back steps, wrapped in a flannel blanket. The sky had quieted, finally, though the echoes still rang somewhere in her bones. Maya came out and sat beside her, knees pulled to her chest. Koda padded up last, flopping down with a satisfied grunt like he'd completed the night's duty. Camilla exhaled. "You okay?" Maya nodded slowly. "I think I'm not the only one who gets scared by sounds." Camilla let out a dry laugh, half broken, half relieved. "No, you're not." After a pause, Maya asked, "Does it ever go away?" Camilla stared at the stars. "The memories, maybe not. But the way they hold you." She looked down at Koda, now fast asleep between them. "That can change." Maya reached out and gently touched the dog's ear. Koda didn't move. He didn't need to. The first thing Camilla heard was the crunch of tires on gravel. But not just any tires. New, heavy, confident. She stepped off the porch, squinting into the afternoon sun. A black Escalade, so polished it caught the sky like a mirror, rolled to a slow stop beside the rust-bitten fence that marked the edge of the Whitaker Ranch. Koda was already at her side, tail stiff, ears locked forward. The back door opened before the engine stopped humming. Out stepped a man in a white linen shirt, tan blazer, and boots that had clearly never seen a patch of real dirt in their lives. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. Dane Whitmore. Behind him emerged a younger man, maybe early 20s, hair slicked back, shoes blindingly clean, a phone still in his hand as if the air here might contaminate him. Elliot. Camilla's fingers curled unconsciously around the porch railing. "You lost?" Dane smiled, the kind of grin that came from a man who never had to knock to enter a room. "Not at all. We're exactly where we meant to be." Koda took one step forward, not aggressive, not welcoming, just present. "I've heard about your dog," Dane continued, letting his eyes flick to Koda with the faintest smirk. "Rumors travel fast, particularly when something unusual shows up at the vet's office." Camilla said nothing. Elliot glanced around the property at the sagging barn doors, the half-mended fences, the rusted tractor under a tarp. His expression couldn't quite hide the distaste. Dane extended a glossy black envelope, monogrammed with gold foil. "A formal invitation," he said smoothly, "to the National Canine Showcase. I'm one of the sponsors, as it happens." Camilla didn't reach for the envelope. He held it a moment longer, then set it on the porch railing beside her coffee mug. "Your companion," he said, gesturing vaguely at Koda, "would make quite the curiosity piece. A shepherd with instincts, they say. No pedigree, no papers. A real underdog story." Camilla tilted her head. "Sounds like you already wrote the headline." Dane chuckled. "Oh, I love a good redemption arc. Audiences eat it up. Of course." His voice dropped just a shade. "That is, if he qualifies." Elliot finally spoke. "He doesn't look like much." Koda let out a soft growl. Not loud, but deep enough to vibrate the wood under Camilla's boots. Camilla reached down and rested a hand on his shoulder. "He sees more than you do. That's enough for me." The smile vanished from Elliot's face. Dane, ever composed, gave a small nod. "Well, consider the invitation open. The event is in 2 weeks, downtown. Formal evaluations begin next Friday. Bring your best." He stepped back toward the SUV, but paused with one hand on the door. "I do hope you come. It's rare the public gets to witness something truly unexpected." There was something off about the way he said it. Too smooth, too rehearsed, like the threat was hidden just behind the consonants. They drove off in a storm of dust that clung to the air longer than necessary. Camilla didn't speak for a full minute. Neither did Koda. Then, finally, she picked up the envelope and tore it open. Inside, a multi-page pamphlet, a personalized card, and a photo of last year's winner, a Belgian Malinois in a studded harness standing on a marble podium. Camilla stared at it for a long moment, then tossed it onto the porch table. Koda nudged her hand with his nose, eyes locked on hers. "They weren't inviting us," she murmured. "They were warning us." That night, Camilla sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. Maya walked in quietly, holding a glass of water. "What was that car?" she asked. Camilla didn't look up. "People who think papers matter more than proof." Maya frowned. "Is he dangerous?" Camilla hesitated, then nodded. "Not the kind who hits, the kind who smiles while someone else does." Later, while Maya was brushing her teeth, Camilla knelt beside Koda's bed in the mudroom. "You okay, Storm?" she whispered, brushing his fur back from the scar near his ear. Koda blinked, leaned his weight against her. Still, steady. She rested her forehead against his. "You don't need to prove anything," she whispered. "But if we go, I want them to see what they tried to bury." She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally loosening just enough to hurt. "I don't care about ribbons, but I care about truth." Koda didn't move, didn't blink. He just stayed. And that was his answer. The glossy pamphlet lay flat on the table like a trap baited with false admiration. Camilla stared at it for the third time that morning, steam curling off her untouched coffee. On its cover, a high-contrast photo of a purebred Malinois mid-leap, mouth open, perfect form, everything bred and trained to impress. Below, bold silver letters, the National Canine Showcase, celebrating excellence, defining legacy. Legacy. She hated that word. It sounded like something carved into a trophy by people who'd never earned a scar. Koda was stretched on the floor beside her boots, his breathing steady, watching her without seeming to. He didn't need to move. He just knew. Camilla's fingers twitched above the pamphlet, debating whether to crumple it or set it on fire. She didn't notice Maya walk in until she sat down quietly across from her. "You didn't sleep," Maya said, not as a question, just as fact. Camilla didn't answer. Maya reached forward, pulled the pamphlet toward herself. She flipped it open, letting the pages slide beneath her fingers, photo after photo of dogs in formation, handlers in sleek uniforms, judges in suits with clipboards. "Do you think they'd laugh at him?" she asked softly. Camilla's breath caught. "I don't care what they think," she said flatly, which wasn't the same as not being afraid. Maya didn't push. She just kept looking, her fingers now resting on one page that featured last year's crowd. Bright lights, perfect smiles, a sea of approval, a world far from their dusty kitchen and patched-up fences. "It's not about competing," she finally said. "It's about them seeing him." Camilla looked at her then, and for a split second the girl's expression reminded her of her daughter back when she was 12, fists balled at her sides, arguing that stray dogs deserved names too. "They don't get to decide what he's worth," Maya added. Camilla stood abruptly, chair scraping. She walked to the sink, gripped the edge until her fingers ached. Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. The kitchen blurred, the light dimmed in corners. She was back in the field hospital, the lights flickering, the smell of smoke and disinfectant. A boy flatlining on the table while her hands were soaked with blood. The sound of shouting. Another mortar outside. She couldn't get the tube in. His lungs. "Cam?" Maya's voice, barely audible. Her knees buckled. But before she could hit the floor, something caught her. Weight, warmth, pressure. Koda. One paw against her side, his body bracing hers from collapse. His head pressed into her abdomen. Not forceful, just enough, just right. Her fingers knotted into his fur as the room slowly tilted back to center. Breath, in, out, again. Maya stood nearby, frozen, not in fear, but in concern too grown for a 14-year-old. When Camilla finally sat down again, hands trembling, she looked across the table. Maya's voice cracked. "That's why they need to see him." Camilla blinked. Maya continued, her words raw. "He doesn't follow commands. He doesn't need a leash. He doesn't bark on cue. But he knows." She placed a hand over the pamphlet. "If those people only care about bloodlines and trophies, let them see what they're missing." Camilla exhaled slowly. She looked down at Koda, who was now sitting beside her, leaning into her hip with quiet vigilance. "What if I freeze again?" she whispered. "Then he'll do that," Maya said simply. Camilla reached out and touched the glossy paper. It felt too smooth, too rehearsed. She turned the page, stopped at the registration form. No check boxes for instinct. No column for save my life in a kitchen full of ghosts. Just handler name, breed, lineage, vaccination record. She stared at the blank spaces for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the cupboard, pulled out an old manila folder. Inside were vet forms, photos, and an old handwritten intake sheet from the day Koda came home. Muddy, torn, nearly dead. She tucked it all into an envelope, folded the registration page and placed it inside. "Do we even own a printer?" she muttered. Maya grinned for the first time that day. "Jonah does." Camilla narrowed her eyes. "Of course he does." Later that night, while the wind howled across the canyon, Camilla sat alone on the porch with Koda at her feet. The stars blinked above them, uncaring, quiet. "I can't promise to win," she whispered. "I can't even promise to show up with my hands steady." Koda rested his chin on her boot. "But I promise this, if they're going to see you, they'll see all of you. The part that saved me." He didn't move, just stayed like he always did, anchored to her without question. She closed her eyes. For the first time, the panic didn't win. The attic hadn't been opened in years, not since her father's funeral, not since the day Camilla came home from basic training and climbed those creaking steps with a duffel bag and swollen knees, pretending the folded flag in her hand didn't weigh more than she did. But now, she stood beneath the dust-covered trapdoor, staring at it like it might bite. Koda sat at the bottom of the ladder, watching, waiting. Camilla exhaled through her nose and pulled the cord. The stairs dropped down with a reluctant groan. The air upstairs was thick years of hay dust, forgotten photo frames, mouse droppings, but the smell was familiar. Weathered wood, saddle oil, dried sweat and sun. The past lived here like an old tenant. She ducked beneath a beam and reached for the rusted trunk at the far end. The lock clicked open easier than she expected. Inside were remnants of a man built from leather and grit bridles, lasso rope, a folded ranch vest, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a faded bandana, a collar and leash, worn smooth with use, cracked at the edges. She lifted them gently, her breath hitching. The collar still bore the imprint of the last name that wore it, Dusty, her father's cattle dog. The tag was barely legible, but the metal still rang when it moved. She traced it with her thumb. "You used to say that dog worked harder than half your hands," she whispered. Her voice caught. "I used to think you were just proud. But maybe you knew what it meant to be kept alive by something that just stayed." The house was quiet when she came back down. Maya was at the kitchen table sketching something Koda's face in charcoal lines and soft shadows. Her pencils stilled when she saw the leash in Camilla's hand. "Was that your dad's?" Maya asked. Camilla nodded. "And his dog's?" She knelt beside Koda and gently looped the collar around his neck. It wasn't perfect, just slightly loose, too wide, but it didn't matter. It sat like it belonged. Koda stayed still, his eyes meeting hers, calm and unwavering. "This isn't a prize collar," she murmured. "It's never touched a red carpet. It's never sat under stadium lights." She buckled it anyway. "It's only been on dogs that don't run when the hard parts start." Later that evening, Camilla stood alone in the barn, fingers wrapped around the leash, now connected to Koda's collar. The place smelled like hay and memory. She didn't give commands, didn't walk him in circles or run obstacle drills. She just stood with him, listened to the wind rattle the roof, let silence settle over them like an old quilt. Her father's words drifted back. "Good dogs don't ask for anything but purpose. And the best ones, they find it for you when you've lost your own." She tightened her grip. "They're not ready for you," she whispered. Koda's ears twitched. "But maybe they need to see you." The leash uncoiled in her palm like a fuse waiting to be lit, not for performance, not for show, but for something ancient, something earned. Maya watched from the doorway. Her eyes weren't wide this time. They were steady. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That night, Camilla cleaned the old collar with saddle soap and her bare hands. She scrubbed the cracks, polished the buckle, and tightened the stitching with needle and thread. Not to hide its age, but to honor it, to remind the world that not everything worthy has to shine. And as Koda slept beside her bed, his breathing deep and even, Camilla set the collar on the nightstand like a flag folded in reverse. Not for morning, for rising. The bell above the feed store door gave a tired jingle as Camilla stepped inside, the heat of the New Mexico sun lingering on her shoulders. The air was thick with alfalfa, leather oil, and the faint musk of horse-grain familiar scents that didn't ask questions. Koda padded in beside her, silent as always, his steps light but assured. The store cat, a grumpy tabby named Moss, took one look and retreated to the rafters. Camilla gave a faint smile. "He has that effect," she murmured. Behind the counter, a man looked up from inventory sheets. He was tall, with a quiet, unassuming presence. Dark hair graying at the temples, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands stained with iodine and ink. "Morning," he said. "You must be Camilla." She stiffened. "That obvious?" He gestured toward Koda. "Not many people come in with a German shepherd who moves like he's reading your heartbeat." She studied him. Calm voice, direct but not intrusive. "You're the new vet?" she asked. "Jonah Alvarez." He wiped his hands and offered one. "I run the clinic out back. Just reopened last month." Camilla shook his hand, surprised at the firmness, but more at the warmth behind it. "He yours?" Jonah asked, nodding toward Koda. "Not exactly," she said. "More like we found each other." Koda had taken a seated position next to her boot, scanning the store like he always did, 3 steps ahead of anything that might go wrong. When Jonah stepped closer, Koda's eyes tracked him, but didn't bristle. Jonah noticed. "He's got working instincts," he said gently. "But not just the kind you train. He's keying off you." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "You see that in 2 minutes?" Jonah chuckled. "It's kind of my thing." She tilted her head, unsure whether to walk away or ask more. He didn't give her a chance. "You planning on showing him?" That froze her. Camilla's fingers tightened around the burlap sack of seed in her hand. "No." Jonah didn't blink. "Just asking." He walked over to a small fridge behind the counter and pulled out a water bottle, handing it to her. "But if you were just hypothetically, I'd say you've got something rare. Most dogs wait for a command." "Yours already made the decision before you even twitched." Camilla glanced down at Koda. His ears were relaxed, but his spine was straight. Her protector, her anchor, never trained, just there. "You some kind of behaviorist?" she asked. "Not exactly," Jonah replied. "My father was. He used to breed dogs for emotional support, long before it was trendy. I watched more dogs heal people than any medicine ever did, got curious, followed the science." He leaned against the counter now, not pushing, just present. "Koda," he repeated the name softly, "doesn't move like a backyard rescue. He moves like legacy." That word again. Legacy. Camilla winced. He was found half dead in a ravine after a storm. Not exactly pedigree material. Jonah nodded slowly. "Sometimes the best bloodlines go underground. Sometimes the world forgets what they created." He paused, then offered a card. "Bring him by the clinic. No charge, no clipboard. Just in case you do decide to show him." She took the card, eyes narrowing. "You always this generous with strangers?" Jonah shrugged. "Only the ones who walk in carrying scars like bandoliers." Camilla blinked. That line hit harder than it should have. She cleared her throat and walked toward the counter to pay. "I'm not interested in shows, not in lights or scores." Jonah nodded. "Didn't think you were. I'm interested in stories. Dogs like Koda usually carry one." He looked down at the shepherd. "And I've got a feeling his isn't done being told." As Camilla exited into the sunlight, Koda paused before the threshold and looked back, just once, at Jonah. For a breath, man and dog held each other's gaze. Jonah smiled, just faintly. "Yeah," he whispered to himself. "You remember something." Back at the truck, Camilla placed the feed bags in the back and slid into the driver's seat, the card still in her hand. She looked at Koda, who had already taken his usual spot passenger seat, head forward, eyes on the road even when it hadn't begun. "He's not wrong, is he?" she asked quietly. Koda didn't answer, but as she turned the ignition, he let out one soft exhale. And for the first time in days, Camilla didn't feel like she was driving toward the edge of something. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was circling back to the start. The drive to Jonah's clinic was silent, except for the rhythmic rattle of gravel beneath the truck tires and the soft breath of wind slipping through a cracked window. Koda sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears flicking occasionally, eyes steady on the road ahead. Camilla didn't speak, not because she didn't want to, but because her thoughts had nowhere to land. Since leaving the feed store, Jonah's words kept playing back. He doesn't move like a backyard rescue. He moves like legacy. Legacy. She didn't believe in bloodlines. She believed in survival, in instincts, in the fact that Koda had saved her more times in silence than any person had in words. And yet, she was here. Jonah's clinic wasn't large. A weathered barn renovated into something between a lab and a living room. On the porch, a faded metal sign read, "Low Voices, High Trust." As she stepped inside, the scent of antiseptic mixed with cedar shavings, calming, clean. Jonah appeared from a back room, wiping his hands on a towel. "You came," he said simply. Camilla nodded and gestured toward Koda. "He doesn't like most buildings, didn't even hesitate here." Jonah smiled. "Dogs know where they're safe." They didn't sit in an exam room. Instead, he led her to an office that looked more like a study bookshelves, framed photos of shepherds in mid-sprint, a cracked leather armchair that had known decades of elbows. "Want coffee?" he asked. She shook her head. "Want answers?" Jonah chuckled softly, pulling open a filing cabinet. Fair. He withdrew a file folder, thick with notes and faded photos, and set it on the desk. A soft thud of weight and memory. "You ever heard of Project Solace?" he asked. Camilla furrowed her brow. "Sounds like something military." "Or pharmaceutical." "Neither," he said. "It was my father's idea. Back in the 90s, before therapy dogs were a thing. He knew that certain bloodlines of shepherds could be bred not just for obedience, but for empathy. Dogs that didn't wait to be told. Dogs that responded to emotional states." Camilla glanced at Koda, who lay beside her, head resting lightly on her boot. Jonah continued, voice steady but edged with something deeper. "He spent 12 years building the line. Selective breeding, gentle imprinting, no compulsion training, just connection. They called them the Solace dogs. Only 12 were ever born. Only 5 ever paired." He reached into the folder and pulled out a photo. Black and white, weathered edges. A shepherd with a crescent-shaped mark on its chest sat beside a young woman in a military hospital bed. "This one," Jonah said, tapping the image, "was Soline, my father's finest. She could sense a seizure coming 3 minutes before onset. Pulled a man out of a burning tent once when no one else heard him scream." Camilla leaned forward, studying the photo. "She disappeared," Jonah said quietly. "Just gone. My dad got a letter saying she died of disease, but he never believed it. And I didn't either, especially when others in the line started vanishing too." Camilla's fingers traced the crescent mark in the photo. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Jonah stood and crossed to a drawer. From inside, he retrieved a small leather pouch and unzipped it with care. Inside, a microchip scanner and a folded piece of paper. "I've scanned Koda already," he said. "He doesn't have the standard shelter chip. but there's a faint echo of a discontinued military-grade Tag 1 used in veterinary trials with confidential oversight. Only one breeder was licensed to use it. He held up the paper. My father. Camilla blinked, stunned. Are you saying... she began. I'm not saying anything I can't prove, Jonah interrupted gently. But what I suspect, Koda isn't just trained. He was born to it, or at least born capable of it. And if he's a descendant of Soline, then someone somewhere tried to erase the line and failed. Outside, wind scraped against the windows. Koda shifted but didn't growl. He watched Jonah with eyes that saw more than curiosity. He found me, Camilla finally said, bleeding into the dirt. Thought he was dead too. Jonah nodded. That's how they usually arrive. Not sent, not bought, just found. She leaned back, exhaling. Why would anyone try to erase dogs like this? Jonah's eyes darkened. Because not everyone wants dogs who think for themselves. Dogs like this don't perform, they respond, and you can't market instinct. He stood, paced once, then opened his glove box. Inside, a photo she hadn't seen before, frayed at the corners, sat beside an old metal dog tag. The name read, Soline, Series 3. A handler's name was scratched out violently. That, Jonah said, pointing, was the last trace of her before she vanished. He handed the tag to Camilla. Koda stood, stepped forward, and touched his nose to it. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Camilla spoke, voice low. If he really is from that line, what does that mean? Jonah met her eyes. It means you don't just have a companion, he said. You're holding a legacy that someone wanted to bury. Koda pressed his head into Camilla's palm, and in that weight she felt the unspoken answer. She wouldn't let it be buried again. The photo sat between them on the kitchen table, yellowed with age, its corners curled like time had tried to protect it from being too easily forgotten. Outside, the ranch was asleep. Cicadas sang in the weeds, and the moon cast long silver streaks through the slats of the barn. Inside, the air was still, dense with something neither Camilla nor Maya had words for. Koda lay nearby, head resting on his crossed paws, chest rising and falling with a calm so deep it seemed practiced. Ancient, almost, as if he'd been waiting for this moment longer than any of them realized. Maya leaned closer to the photo, her face lit only by the warm glow of the lantern. Her name was Soline? She asked quietly. Camilla nodded. That's what Jonah said. The original. She looks like him, Maya whispered. But there's something different in the eyes. She's watching someone, Camilla murmured. She's focused. Maya tilted the photo slightly. No. She's feeling someone. Camilla's breath caught. It wasn't just a look of obedience or posture, it was presence, the kind of gaze that knew when someone's pain didn't show on the surface. A kind of emotional gravity that couldn't be trained, only born. Maya's fingers hovered over the chest of the dog in the photo. There, she said. See it? A mark, subtle, but unmistakable, arched along the right side of Soline's chest. A pale patch of fur in the shape of a crescent moon just where her heart would be. Camilla slowly turned her eyes toward Koda. He didn't move, but his ears twitched, and his eyes, those deep, dark, quiet pools, lifted toward her, holding her gaze like they always did when something inside her shifted. She moved across the room, crouched beside him. "Koda," she said softly. He blinked. Her fingers brushed aside the thick fur at his chest, parting it gently until the light found the shape beneath. And there it was, the same pale crescent. Her breath left her like someone had knocked the wind from her body, quiet, fast, and full of disbelief. Maya was beside her now, kneeling wordlessly. The girl didn't speak. She just reached out, laid her hand next to Camilla's, and traced the shape with the tips of her fingers. Camilla couldn't stop staring. "How is this possible?" she finally said, her voice barely audible. "After all this time, after everything." Maya looked up at her grandmother. Her voice was different now, calm, steady, older somehow. "I don't think we found him," she said. "I think he found us." Camilla sat back on her heels. All those nights, the panic attacks, the shaking hands, the mornings she woke screaming without knowing why, Koda had been there, untrained, undirected, but knowing. She thought it was chance. Now, it felt like something else entirely. Like the kind of grace that arrives in silence, in the dark, when you're too broken to ask for saving, and it shows up anyway. Maya looked at the photo again. "Do you think he remembers her?" Camilla looked at Koda. "Maybe not with memory, but maybe with something deeper." Koda shifted then, just slightly, pressing his head into Camilla's thigh, not seeking affection, offering it, like always. Later that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Camilla sat on the porch with the photo in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. The stars were out, clear, sharp, and endless. Koda lay at her feet, watching the trees sway in the distance like he expected something from them. Camilla spoke into the quiet. "You were never just a stray, were you?" Koda didn't react. "You came from a line of dogs bred for empathy, for pain, for healing." She paused. "But nobody had to train you to save me. You chose to." That made her throat tighten. It wasn't the breeding. It wasn't even the science behind it. It was the choice. She thought of her old unit, of the men and women who didn't make it home, of the med tent in Kandahar, of the sounds of bone and metal and dust. She thought of herself dragging her own body across the floor of her parents' ranch just months ago, unable to breathe from the weight of memories no one could see. And she thought of Koda, pressing into her, sitting silent by the door, sleeping beside her, never leaving even when she screamed in her sleep. Camilla took a shaky breath and looked at the photo one last time before folding it carefully and slipping it into her pocket. Not to archive it, to carry it, to remember. She looked down at Koda. "I think," she whispered, "they'll want to see you now." Koda lifted his eyes, met hers. A soft, single thump of his tail. Not trained, not told, just connected. The wind had picked up by midnight. It howled low across the flats of the ranch, pushing dry soil into ghostly spirals, rattling the old tin panels on the barn roof. The porch light flickered once, then again. But Camilla didn't notice. She was asleep for once. A deep, dreamless sleep, rare, earned. Koda lay across the threshold, eyes closed, ears twitching now and then, like a sentinel caught between dreams and duty. Until the wind changed, until something broke the rhythm, a sound too soft for a human ear, but not his. the subtle creak of a gate latch, the shuffle of boots trying too hard to be silent. Koda was up before the sound came again. No growl, just motion. Silent. Controlled. The barn door wasn't latched when Camilla woke. She noticed it before she even saw the sun, noticed it in her gut first. That ancient ache that lived just below her ribs, the same one that told her when a soldier had been shot but didn't know it yet, that told her when the air shifted wrong in a quiet village. That same instinct stopped her now in the middle of her morning routine. Koda was already standing rigid beside the screen door, tail low, eyes fixed across the field. Camilla grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace, heart already thudding against her chest. Koda didn't wait. He moved ahead, quiet but sharp, ears back, body coiled. They reached the barn in under a minute. The door creaked open. The stench hit first acrid, chemical, wrong. Inside, it was chaos. One of the feed sacks had been ripped open and soaked in something that smelled like antifreeze. A dark green sheen pooled beneath it, spreading across the concrete like venom. Koda's gear, his harness, the leash, the makeshift training vest Maya had stitched by hand was slashed, torn through the middle like someone had taken a box cutter to it with rage instead of precision. The wall was worse. Spray paint. Red. Crude. Big letters. Jagged. Trembling with anger. Withdraw, or he won't make it to the ring. Camilla didn't move for a second, just stared. The silence of the barn collapsed around her like a vacuum, and the words began to ring in her ears as if they had been shouted instead of sprayed. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then dropped to one knee and wrapped her arms around Koda. He didn't flinch, didn't shake, just leaned into her. When Jonah arrived 20 minutes later, after her panicked call, the rage in his voice was the quiet kind. Controlled. Too controlled. "They tried to poison your stock," he said, kneeling beside the feed. "You'd have lost your cattle. Maybe the horses, too." Camilla stared straight ahead. "They cut his vest," she whispered, "not just to ruin it, to send a message." Jonah nodded. This wasn't a prank. Camilla looked over at the red letters again. Something in her expression changed. Less fear, more steel. "This wasn't about keeping us out of the showcase," she said. "It's about hiding what he is." Jonah met her eyes. "They're scared," he said. "Scared people do stupid things." She rose slowly, brushing hay and dust from her knees. "No," she said. "Dangerous people do dangerous things, and scared ones, they do them at night." Later, after Maya helped clean up the mess and rehang what could be salvaged of Koda's gear, she stood in the doorway of the barn holding the mangled vest in her hands. "It's not fair," she said quietly. "He didn't ask for any of this." Camilla stepped beside her. "Neither did you." Maya looked up, her eyes glassy but defiant. "But I'm not running." Camilla didn't smile, but something in her posture softened. She placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Good," she said, "because neither is he." Koda, as if sensing the moment, walked over and sat beside them, eyes locked on the fading red paint across the far wall. The crescent mark on his chest caught a sliver of sunlight. That night, Camilla didn't sleep. She sat on the porch with the rifle across her lap and Koda at her feet. Every creak of the wood, every groan of the wind through the trees. She listened. And Koda listened too. They didn't need words. They'd seen war. They'd lived through the kind of nights that steal names and silence futures. But this night, this barn, this threat, it wasn't the same. This time, she wasn't a soldier following orders. She was a woman standing her ground, with a dog they couldn't control, a bond they couldn't break, and a truth they were no longer willing to bury. The red dirt of New Mexico doesn't lie. It clings to boots like regret, paints the undercarriage of trucks like blood memory, and leaves a trail even ghosts would hesitate to follow. And this morning, it told Camilla exactly what she needed to know. "They came through the west fence," Jonah said, crouched low with a flashlight, even though the sun was already peeking over the ridge. "Tracks are fresh, less than 10 hours old." Koda stood beside him, nose twitching, tail stiff but low. His paws hovered just above the indentations in the soil, as if he knew what they meant, but didn't want to disturb them. Camilla stood silent, eyes scanning the fence line. One section of wire hung limp, snipped clean, deliberate. Not a coyote, not some wandering teen. This was someone who knew the land. Jonah moved along the tracks, eyes narrowing. "Tread pattern matches luxury all-terrain. Look, these ridges? Custom tires. Expensive ones." Camilla crossed her arms. "Whitmore drives a Mercedes G-Class." "Exactly," Jonah said, glancing up at her. "And this soil, red clay mixed with silica dust. Only sticks like this in 3 areas nearby. One of them's his breeding estate." He straightened, brushing his hands on his jeans. "We could call the sheriff, but we both know how deep Dane's pockets run in this county." Camilla nodded. Her voice, when it came, was low but cutting. "I'm not calling anyone who shakes Whitmore's hand at fundraisers." Jonah took a breath. "Then we dig." They followed the tire tracks for half a mile before they disappeared onto hardpan near the highway, where the dust gave way to gravel and secrets dried under the sun. But that was enough. Jonah pulled out his phone. "I want to show you something." He scrolled through photographs of the Whitmore estate, shot from public roads and drones. One in particular caught her eye. A distant view of the east paddock. Several high-end shepherds were being exercised behind polished fencing. But it wasn't the dogs that held her attention. It was the structure beside them. "Is that a training shed?" she asked. Jonah nodded. "Soundproof, reinforced, built like a military facility. Most of the show breeders use them to condition dogs for high-stress environments. But Dane's setup, it's more than that." He flipped to another image. Night vision, faint and grainy. A silhouette of a man unloading what appeared to be old crates. "I think Whitmore's not just showing dogs," Jonah said. "I think he's been covering up something for years. The Solace bloodline wasn't just stolen, it was buried." Camilla's jaw tightened. "And Koda's resurrection is threatening to exhume it." Jonah tapped a final image, an archival document from his father's files. "According to this, the last confirmed location of Solene before she vanished? The Whitmore Transport Depot, 2 miles from his estate." A beat of silence fell between them. Even the wind paused. Then Camilla said softly, "They're not trying to discredit us." Jonah nodded grimly. "They're trying to erase him." Back at the ranch, Camilla leaned against the barn post, eyes heavy with the weight of truth and inevitability. Koda stood beside her, pressing gently into her hip. "You know what they did, don't you?" she whispered, fingers brushing the side of his neck. He didn't move, didn't need to. It was in his stillness. In the quiet way his ears turned toward every sound behind them, the way his breathing matched hers, as if he was trying to keep her grounded again. Camilla exhaled slowly, then turned to Jonah. "We need proof, not suspicion. Something they can't erase." Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. "I'll talk to my father. He's the only one left who knew the handlers directly. If there's a paper trail left, he might remember where it leads." Camilla nodded. "Go. I'll keep things locked down here." But as Jonah started toward his truck, Koda let out a low growl. They both turned. And there, half buried beneath the cedar rail fence, Camilla spotted something glinting in the dust. She knelt and pulled it free. A syringe cap, sterile, commercial grade. Her stomach twisted. "They weren't just trying to send a message," she said quietly. "They were ready to end him." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Then we make damn sure they don't get a second chance." That night, Camilla checked every lock, bolted every window, and parked her truck in front of the barn doors. She laid the syringe cap on the table like evidence in a trial that hadn't yet begun. But in her chest, something had shifted. Not just fear, not even anger, conviction. Because now she knew what they were really fighting. Not for trophies, not for bloodlines, but for memory. For a dog that had been written off before anyone saw what he truly was, and for a truth too quiet to be shouted, but too alive to bury. The assisted living facility didn't smell like death, but it didn't smell like life either. The corridors were clean, too quiet, wheelchairs parked like forgotten memories. A muted television played a rerun game show no one was watching. Jonah walked slowly, holding a manila envelope close to his chest. He glanced back at Camilla, who followed behind him with Koda padding silently at her heel. Even here, the dog moved like shadow. "He's lucid most mornings," Jonah said under his breath. "But today was different. He asked for me. Told the nurses, 'My son's coming to ask about the shepherd who wasn't supposed to survive.' That was the phrase he used." Camilla didn't respond, but her fingers twitched slightly at her side. Room 212. Jonah knocked twice, opened the door. Inside, Jeremiah Alvarez sat upright in a recliner by the window. Time had folded his frame, hollowed his cheeks, but there was fire behind his cataract-clouded eyes. When he looked up and saw Koda, his breath hitched, quiet and sharp, like something sacred had just walked in. "Good Lord," the old man whispered. "He's got it." Camilla frowned. "Got what?" Jeremiah didn't answer right away. He reached with shaking fingers to a leather binder on his lap, weathered, warped, but carefully wrapped in a military scarf. The initials J.A. were burned into the corner. "Sit, both of you." They did. Koda lay down by Camilla's feet, head resting between his paws but ears forward listening. Jeremiah opened the binder. First came the photos. Old, grainy, black and white. German shepherds standing at attention beside soldiers in fatigues. One photo showed a female dog with intelligent eyes and a crescent moon-shaped patch on her chest. Camilla felt her breath catch. "That's her," Jonah said quietly. "Solene." Jeremiah nodded. "She was the first, the prototype. We didn't train her for commands, we trained her to feel, to stay, to choose. Took years to get it right. Then, she vanished." He flipped a page. A breeding log. Handwritten notes. Solene was bred only once to another empathetic line male named Hector. 4 pups born, 2 stillborn, 1 lost in transport. 1 survived. And beside that pup's name, no formal ID, shipment rerouted to private handler contracted by D.W. Camilla leaned forward. "Dane Whitmore." Jeremiah's eyes hardened. He stole the line. Claimed the pup didn't meet show standards, but I knew better. He didn't want the world seeing what these dogs could do without ribbons or applause. Jonah gently turned the page, a carbon-copied chain of custody sheet, signed by Jeremiah, co-signed by Dane Whitmore, marked Confidential Transfer, No Registry. Date, May 7th, 2010. Destination, Timber Ravine Holding Center. Camilla's stomach dropped. "That's where I found Koda," she said slowly. 10 years later. Jeremiah nodded. "I warned them. Dogs like this, if you abandon them, they don't just survive, they wait." His voice trembled. "They remember." The silence in the room thickened. Outside the window, the sun dipped behind the hills. Golden light spilled in like truth through stained glass. Jeremiah closed the binder. "I can't go to court. My days are numbered. But the records are real. You'll find the microchip data still embedded serial number cross-referenced in the original Solace line." Jonah opened the envelope he'd carried in. Inside were copies of the documents, notarized and time-stamped, enough to withstand scrutiny. "Thank you," Camilla said softly. Jeremiah turned to her. "He's not just a dog." "I know." "No," the old man insisted, eyes blazing. "You know what he is, but they don't. They'll mock him, then fear him, then try to bury him again. So if you walk him into that ring, you better be ready." Camilla looked down at Koda. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. On the drive back, the binder rested on Camilla's lap. Her fingers traced the leather, feeling the pressure of history stitched into every corner. Jonah glanced at her. "You okay?" She exhaled through her nose. "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to." Camilla shook her head. "Yes, I do, but not for the trophy, and not to spite Whitmore." She looked in the rear-view mirror. Koda sat in the back seat, watching the horizon. "I'm doing this because there are stories no one ever heard, and he's carrying all of them in silence." That night, Camilla placed the binder on the table next to the syringe cap, proof and threat, legacy and warning. Then she knelt beside Koda and pressed her forehead gently to his. "Looks like you weren't lost," she whispered. "You were waiting." Koda closed his eyes. And for the first time, Camilla felt like she wasn't walking into battle. She was walking toward something already hers. The first morning of training began before the sun dared open its eyes. The desert was still, the kind of silence that felt thick like fog, but made of memory. Camilla stood in the soft gray of pre-dawn, boots planted in the dirt, arms folded tight across her chest. A single line of cones marked the beginning of what was meant to be an obstacle course. Improvised hurdles, barrels, an old tire swing, and a rusted scaffolding beam. It looked like a junkyard auditioning as a training ground. Koda sat beside her, tail still, ears attentive. Waiting, not for command but for rhythm. She hadn't slept, not because of nightmares, but because of the weight of what was coming. She hadn't trained anything in years, not a patient, not herself, definitely not a dog. Yet here she was, with a binder full of classified lineage, a dead man's records, a granddaughter drawing charts at the kitchen table, and a dog who apparently wasn't just a stray, but living proof that empathy could be bred into instinct. Still, the thought of raising her voice of barking orders made her stomach turn. She didn't want a performer. She wanted something that didn't have to be explained. She knelt. Koda met her eyes, and she whispered, "Let's just see what happens." She walked to the first obstacle, a series of upturned buckets staggered unevenly, mimicking rocky terrain. She didn't gesture, didn't point, just stepped over them, slow, deliberate. Koda watched her, waited, then followed, not with precision, but with mirroring. He stepped where she stepped, leaned where she leaned. When she hesitated, so did he. When she breathed out slow, he did too. By the time they reached the end of the first row, Camilla's fingers were trembling, not from fear, from awe. They moved on to the tunnel, an old irrigation pipe propped between two bales of hay. Camilla ducked and crawled through. A second later, she felt the slight pressure of paws echoing behind her. When she emerged, dirt on her elbows, she turned and Koda slid out without a sound. She didn't say, "Good boy." It wasn't necessary. He knew. By mid-morning, she had recreated a simulation of a triggering environment. A tarp that flapped violently in the wind, a loud radiostatic noise from an old ham unit Jonah had loaned her, and a set of empty gun casings strewn across the dirt. She stood in the center, closed her eyes. Her breath tightened. The sound of the static crawled into her ear like it always did, dragging memories behind it. She didn't mean to let it happen. Didn't mean for her knees to buckle slightly, or her fists to clench. But before she could fall, Koda was there. He pressed his body against her left hip. Not aggressively, not to stop her. Just enough pressure, just enough contact. A heartbeat in fur. Camilla opened her eyes, and she was still standing. Over the following days the routine grew, not in complexity, but in connection. Every lesson was a test not of command, but of trust. When she walked across the balance beam of old fence rails, Koda didn't wait for instruction. He simply stepped on behind her, never rushing, never pushing. When she tried to simulate night terror responses, tossing and thrashing under a blanket on the porch, Koda would nudge her hands free, place his head across her chest, the same move every time. That unspoken promise. I'm here. Wake up if you need, but I'm here either way. One afternoon, as the sun dipped into copper light, Camilla sat on an overturned water trough, watching Koda weave through the cones Maya had laid out. She hadn't raised her voice once, hadn't used a treat, or a clicker, or a leash. And yet, he never took his eyes off her. Jonah, who had dropped by with a new first aid kit, leaned against the fence post behind her. "I've seen military-grade obedience," he said, "but this isn't that." Camilla looked up, squinting against the sun. "This is something else," Jonah said softly. "It's like he doesn't want to leave your side, not because he's trained, but because he chooses not to." Camilla said nothing, but in her lap her hand had drifted to the dog collar from her father's box, the old leather one, worn and scarred, the brass nameplate long faded. She turned it over in her hands, then looked back at Koda. He was sitting now, not panting, just watching her. The sun behind him cast a silhouette that looked like memory. That night, the sky above the ranch burned purple and gold. Stars arrived slowly, as if reluctant to break the spell. Camilla stood by the porch. Koda lay beside her boots, tail curled. She whispered, more to herself than him, "They'll say this isn't real training." Koda's ear flicked once. "And maybe they're right," she continued, staring out at the fence line, beyond which the coyotes sometimes sang. "But if you can teach someone how to stay when it's easier to leave—" She looked down at him. "Then maybe that's the only training that ever mattered." Koda didn't move, didn't need to. His presence was the answer. The ranch's kitchen had never looked like much, just faded linoleum, a stubborn faucet that dripped when it rained, and cabinets with hinges that groaned like old men. But on that late afternoon it felt full, not from noise, but from presence. Maya sat at the kitchen table, legs folded beneath her, a half-chewed pencil wedged behind one ear. Her hair, still slightly damp from the morning chores, hung in loose tangles. In front of her, the table was littered with printer paper, sticky notes, and a hand-drawn chart that looked more like a child's treasure map than any formal training diagram. At the center of every scribbled line, Koda. "Okay, so," she said, tapping the paper with the back of her pencil. "When Grandma's breathing speeds up, he sits closer like, always exactly 18 inches away. But if she clutches her left wrist, he'll nudge it 3 times. Jonah, leaning on the counter with a chipped mug in hand, raised an eyebrow. 3? Maya nodded, serious. I counted. Over 4 episodes. Not barking, not pawing, just these soft nudges, like he's saying, "You're not alone, you're not back there." Camilla, standing near the fridge, didn't speak. Her hands were wet from rinsing dishes. She didn't dare dry them, afraid the sound of a towel might break the moment. Because Maya was laughing. Not loudly, not the high-pitched, careless giggle of someone without history, but the kind of laughter that crept out between sentences, that softened syllables, that hung on the edges of joy long forgotten. "And get this," Maya added, flipping a page, revealing a crude stick figure labeled "Me," arms crossed. "When I was crying last Tuesday, he came over and leaned his whole body against me like this." She gestured dramatically, bumping the salt shaker off its place. "Like a big weighted blanket, but only after I stopped trying to hide it." Jonah chuckled. "That's not obedience. That's intuition." Maya tilted her head. "It's like he doesn't follow commands. He just knows people." She sat back, arms crossed now for real. "This isn't training," she said, eyes dancing with something that might have once been sorrow, reshaped now into awe. "This is knowing." A silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was reverent. Outside, Koda lay sprawled across the porch, half asleep, one ear cocked toward the kitchen as if he too knew he was being spoken of. The golden light of late afternoon stretched across his coat, highlighting the crescent mark on his chest, so familiar now that Maya had stopped seeing it as coincidence. Jonah set his mug down. "You know, when I was in school," he said, his voice low but certain, "we were taught that certain behaviors in animals were reflex, stimulus, response. But Koda? He challenges all that." Camilla finally dried her hands, slowly. "He doesn't react to stimuli," Jonah continued, now standing beside the table, eyes flicking over Maya's charts. "He responds to stories. Your body tells one, mine, hers." He nodded toward Camilla. "And he listens." Maya smiled. For the first time in weeks, her smile didn't look like a mask trying too hard. It looked real. Later that evening, as twilight folded over the ranch like a soft blanket, Camilla found Maya outside on the porch. The air smelled like dry earth and cut grass. Crickets had begun their nightly choir. Koda lay beside the steps, his chin on his paws. Maya had her sketch pad open again, not to draw charts, but something simpler. A picture of Koda, curled up under a tree, eyes open and alert. "You're good at that," Camilla said quietly. Maya didn't look up. "He makes it easy." Camilla sat down beside her, joints stiff from the long day. A long silence passed. Then Maya spoke again. "You know, when Mom died, I thought I'd never laugh again. Not like really laugh. It felt wrong." Camilla looked at her. "But today—" Maya shook her head, brushing a loose strand behind her ear. "It just came out, and I didn't feel guilty. Not even for a second. Camilla's throat tightened. She reached over, gently touched Maya's hand. That's okay, baby. That's what healing sounds like. Maya looked at her then, really looked into the eyes of a woman who had known loss, pain, silence. And slowly, Maya leaned her head against Camilla's shoulder. They stayed like that for a while. No words, just the warmth of connection, the steady breath of a dog beside them, the soft rustle of desert wind. Inside, Jonah finished cleaning up the table. He carefully gathered Maya's papers, stacked them neatly, and slipped a sticky note on top. Some dogs choose their people, and some people don't even realize they were chosen. He set the stack on the windowsill, where the evening breeze stirred its edges like a whisper from the canyon. And beneath the stars, for the first time in a long time, the ranch felt like a place where things could begin again. The first raindrops hit the tin roof like impatient fingers tapping on glass, sharp, uneven, relentless. Camilla stood by the barn door, her shoulders hunched beneath an old army green jacket, watching the storm roll in. The wind had changed hours earlier, carrying with it the coppery scent of ozone and dust. Now, lightning tore through the horizon, silent for a breath, then followed by a roar that trembled through the soles of her boots. Koda shifted beside her, his ears alert, body still. And somewhere inside her chest, a pressure began to build. The thunder rolled closer, flash, crack, boom. Camilla flinched. Not just flinched, jerked, like something unseen had pulled her backward through time. She staggered against the wall, clutching her ribs, her breaths going shallow, ragged. The barn warped in her vision, metal walls becoming canvas tents, hay bales turning to sandbags. And the smell, oh God, the smell, diesel and blood and burning. No, no, she whispered, pressing her hands over her ears. Her knees gave out. And that's when Koda moved. Not panicked, not barking, just calm, present. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and sat in front of her collapsed frame. Then, as thunder cracked again, he placed one heavy paw, solid, warm, certain directly, over her heart. Camilla's eyes flew open. The world snapped back into shape, not instantly, not perfectly, but like a camera lens finding its focus through the fog. He was looking straight at her, not with worry, not with confusion, but with something deeper, recognition. Camilla gasped, not from fear, but from the feeling of air returning after being held under water too long. Her hand lifted, trembling, and rested on top of his paw. And for the first time, she didn't pull away from the past. She faced it, with him. Later that night, the rain slowed to a hush. The sky was still bruised, still grumbling in the distance, but the worst had passed. Camilla stood outside, barefoot in the mud, her jacket soaked through. Her hair clung to her temples, and her breath rose in faint clouds under the cool wind. Koda sat nearby, watching her. The ranch was quiet now. The world, briefly, held its breath. Camilla bent down slowly. She reached for a smooth stick near the edge of the barn and dragged it through the wet earth, a slow, deliberate motion. The line she drew wasn't much, maybe 2 feet across, maybe less, but it was everything. A boundary, a commitment, a vow no one else would ever hear. But she knew he would understand. She stood back, her voice barely above the wind. "We go," she whispered. Koda rose, walked across the line, and sat beside her. Maya had been watching from the window. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Because in that quiet gesture, in that single line in the dirt, she saw it. that her grandmother wasn't just surviving anymore. She had chosen not to forget the war, not to outrun it, but to walk forward with it, with a dog who somehow carried the same battle. Inside, later, Camilla sat on the floor of the living room, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Koda lay curled beside her, his paw still touching her knee. Maya brought over a cup of tea, too strong, slightly bitter, but warm. "I saw the line," Maya said quietly. Camilla looked up. "I didn't step over it," Maya added. "But I think I will. Soon." Camilla reached for her hand. "You don't have to." Maya nodded. "I know. But I think Koda already did." They smiled, not the wide kind, the kind people give each other when words are too small for what's been shared. That night, as rain kissed the windows and the sky mumbled far away, Camilla slept with one hand resting near Koda's fur. No nightmares came. No shadows clawed at the walls, because sometimes healing doesn't come like a flash of light. Sometimes it's a line drawn in the dirt, and a dog who steps over it, just to say, "I'm with you now." The road to the National Canine Showcase felt too smooth like a lie polished until it forgot it was false. Camilla's truck rattled over the last mile, dust trailing behind. Koda sat tall, unbothered, ears flicking at the noise from speakers, vendors, and handlers, shouting commands at dogs named things like Regal Titan. They didn't belong here, but they came anyway. The parking lot gleamed with Escalades and luxury trailers. Camilla pulled into the last dirt patch, engine coughing to a stop. Laughter followed. She stepped out in scuffed boots, opened the door for Koda. He leapt down graceful, steady, ignoring the stairs. "Who let the mutt in?" someone muttered. At check-in they were sent to Sector C, the forgotten corner, far from the velvet ropes and diamond collars. They passed booths of treadmills, protein treats, and tuxedoed retrievers. Koda's scarred ear and limp drew whispers. Camilla knelt beside him. "Steady," she murmured. "They don't know you. Yet." She spotted Dane Whitmore polished, smirking, until he saw her. His smile stayed, but his eyes narrowed. He saluted mockingly. Camilla didn't flinch. That evening, under fading light, they watched handlers parade dogs beneath spotlights. Camilla sipped cold coffee, Koda resting his head on her knee. "We'll go when they're ready," she whispered. Then the rules shifted. The spotlight turned. In the arena, handlers showed off precision heel turns, bite demos, flawless scent work. Then came Camilla. No choreography, no script. Exhibitor, Camilla Hart. Canine, Koda. Begin. She stepped forward. Koda matched her, not behind but in rhythm. His gaze never left her. Then a burst of fireworks echoed nearby. Her breath hitched, knees buckled, the spiral began. And Koda moved, quiet, sure, pressed his weight across her shins. Nose touched her palm, then his paw rested over her heart. The crowd froze. The judges leaned in. Phones lowered. No one spoke. Camilla whispered, "I'm here." And she was. Applause followed, not thunderous but full, like breath released after too long. A judge stood, hand over heart. "Thank you." Her lips formed silently. Dane Whitmore stood stone still, jaw clenched. Elliot beside him lowered his gaze. Koda hadn't performed. He had connected. Later, in the quiet of Sector C, Camilla sat outside Koda's kennel, sleepless, a soft sound fabric against canvas. Figures slipped under the tent flap, a syringe, a mesh muzzle. But Koda was faster. He latched onto one man's arm, drove him into the kennel wall. Camilla tackled the second, fought him down, disarmed him. By the time security arrived, both intruders were zip-tied, face down in the dirt. Camilla stood over them, breathing hard. "They're scared of you," she told Koda after, wiping his muzzle clean. "They should be." Maya arrived, wide-eyed. "What happened?" Camilla hugged her tight. "They're not playing anymore." "So what do we do?" Camilla looked out at the polished kennels, the banners, the false shine. "We finish what we came to do." That night she stayed beside Koda, hand on his shoulder as the wind stirred outside. Inside, in the strip of light between them, was resolve. And it didn't make a sound. The lantern above the stall flickered against the night, casting long shadows on the dust-packed ground. The expo had gone quiet. Even the dogs slept soundly, except Koda. He lay still, ears up, eyes fixed on a figure slipping past the security rope. Camilla looked up from her worn notebook when Koda shifted. Then she saw him. "Elliot," she said flatly. "You lost?" The boy stepped closer, hands raised slightly. "No, just late." Without his father's shadow, he looked smaller. His voice faltered. "He remembers me." Camilla stiffened. "He doesn't forget much." Elliot exhaled. 3 years ago, Timber Ravine. I was dared to walk the rim at night. I slipped. Koda found me, barked till someone came, and I said nothing because I knew if Dad found out, he'd take him, ruin him. You knew what your father would do. I was 13, scared, thought he was safer out there. And now? Now Dad's filed a pedigree challenge, claims Koda's stolen show stock. Papers go in next week. Why tell me? Because I owe him. Because I saw what he is, not property, and I realized I've been a coward. Elliot offered help. Jeremiah Alvarez might have proof. Dad couldn't outbid him. If I get you in to see him, will you fight? Camilla nodded. I don't run. Tell him thank you, Elliot said, before disappearing into the dark. Alone again, Camilla sat on the feed bucket, Koda's head resting in her lap. You just keep finding the people who need saving, don't you? For the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small, real one. Before dawn, Camilla sat on the barn steps, coffee cold in her hands. The challenge notice lay unopened beside her. Dane had made his move, legal, precise. She thought of leaving. Maya's soft voice interrupted. Are you running again? Camilla didn't answer. Maya knelt beside her. Is he trying to take Koda? Camilla nodded. Claims I falsified ownership. Then what are you going to do? I thought about disappearing. No. Camilla finally looked at her. Maya's eyes brimmed with fear. You said you don't run. I don't. I just step away when the battle's lost. But it's not lost. Maya's voice trembled as she spoke of Koda's quiet comfort during a storm. They can take trophies. Not that. Camilla rose slowly, walked to Koda, and crouched beside him. We stay, she said. Koda rested his head on her knee. That morning, an old sedan arrived. Jeremiah Alvarez emerged, clutching a worn folder. His eyes softened when he saw Koda. God, she made it. Who? Camilla asked. Soline's line. He's not her, but he carries her still. That crescent, I'd know it anywhere. Jeremiah opened the folder old records, photos, a manifest showing Dane once had Soline, and she never returned. This proves Koda's heritage. They tried to erase it, Jeremiah said. Maya pointed at the photo. Then he's special? He's chosen. Loyalty from connection, not command. Camilla, holding the proof, felt her strength return. Thank you. You'll still have to fight, Jeremiah warned. Let them come, Camilla said. He's waited long enough to be seen. That night, Camilla and Maya sat beneath the fading lights, reading every page. Do you think they'll believe us? Maya asked. They don't have to. We just have to show them. Beside them, Koda lifted his head into the breeze, ready. The final round of the National Canine Showcase filled the arena with murmuring crowds and sharp lights. Camilla stood at the threshold, calm, present. Koda sat beside her, eyes locked on her, not the cameras or the crowd. Maya and Jonah watched from the sidelines. Jeremiah stood further back, quiet but intent. Next up, Camilla, Wren, and Koda, came the announcer's voice. Camilla stepped forward, Koda half a pace behind. The test wasn't about obstacles. It was instinct under distress. They were ready, until the crash came, metal on metal, echoing like gunfire. Camilla dropped, shielding herself, breath frozen, but Koda moved. Gently, he pressed against her chest, one paw at her shoulder, the other over her heart, steady, warm, present. The arena stilled. No one whispered. No one moved. Camilla's trembling hand found his fur. The spiral slowed. Air returned. She whispered, "Good." And Koda stepped back, letting her rise. A judge stood. Was that trained? Camilla shook her head. That's just knowing. The applause was thunderous, raw, and real, but not from everyone. High above, Dane Whitmore gripped the railing, furious. Elliot stood beside him, silent, eyes on the wreckage backstage. Jonah followed his gaze, moving toward security. In the ring, Koda stayed beside Camilla, not as performance, but as promise. They hadn't come to impress. They came to stand their ground. And then Koda did more. Without a command, he circled her once, anchored her with a gentle brush, then sat, tall and steady. He placed a paw over her heart again. The arena held its breath. He lay down, not obedience but surrender, rolled to his side trust, crawled back connection. His head found her palm. She saved me, Camilla whispered. Koda nosed her med pack, nudged the grounding bracelet toward her hand. He wouldn't let her spiral. No applause now, just reverence. Judges leaned in. One finally asked, "What breed is he?" Camilla smiled softly. "He's mine." Behind the rope, Jonah grinned. Jeremiah nodded. Maya mouthed, "Wow." Dane said nothing as security identified the saboteur. He had already lost, because the world had seen what mattered. The review panel convened. Camilla stood beside Jonah and Maya, Koda at her feet, calm, alert. Dane sat opposite, lawyer whispering in his ear. Elliot stood alone, adjusting the mic. "I wasn't supposed to speak," Elliot began, "but I owe him." He told of Timber Ravine, how Koda kept him conscious until rescue came, how his father covered it up. Jonah laid out proof microchip logs, breeding records, chain of custody forms, and the forged intake form. Jeremiah added, "These are the last unaltered records from Soline's line. Dane didn't lose the dog, he stole him." The judges cross-checked everything. One turned to Dane. "Comment?" Dane clenched his jaw. The truth was clear in ink, in silence, in Elliot's eyes. The lead judge declared, "We suspend all claims by Mr. Whitmore." Effective immediately, we recognize Camilla Rowe as Koda's rightful handler, the last verified of the Solace line. And for his authentic response during real-time PTSD distress, we award Koda and Camilla the 2025 National K9 Showcase Medal of Honor. The room didn't applaud, it stood. Trainers, judges, handlers stood for a dog who didn't need medals, and the woman who never asked for applause. Security led Dane away. He met Koda's gaze for 1 second and flinched. Camilla knelt, ran a hand over Koda's face. He nudged her gently as if to say, "It's over." But she knew. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A truth the world had finally seen. Some souls don't need papers. They just need to be believed. The wind at Solace Ridge no longer carried silence. It carried voices. Boots crunched over gravel. A German shepherd barked softly in the distance. Laughter rose from the old paddock once overgrown with tumbleweeds, now rebuilt into a training field that felt more like a place of remembrance than routine. What used to be Whitaker Ranch, the forgotten corner of red dirt and barbed fences, now bore a wooden sign carved by hand. Solace Ridge Canine Center, where healing has a name. Below it, someone had painted a simple white crescent barely visible unless the light hit it just right, just like the patch on Koda's chest. Camilla stood at the far edge of the yard, a whistle in her mouth, worn jeans tucked into scuffed boots. She blew a short command, and 3 shepherds snapped to attention. One of them, an eager young dog named Nova, mimicked a grounding maneuver beside a veteran who stood with his hands trembling. The man's breathing slowed. Koda watched from the shade, older now, grayer around the eyes, but still alert, still present. Jonah stood nearby, clipboard in hand, glancing toward the ranch house where Maya was giving a quiet tour to a new Group 2 Marines, a retired nurse, and a man who hadn't spoken since his last deployment. "Do you think she'll stay?" Jonah asked, nodding toward the silent man. Camilla tilted her head. "She hasn't run yet," she said. "That's something." "Still counts," he agreed. They watched as Maya handed each visitor a small journal and a lead rope knot leashes, not rules. Just threads, waiting to be tied. Jeremiah, slower on his feet these days, shuffled out of the barn carrying a box of old papers records he'd kept for decades. Every once in a while he burned one, not to hide it, but to release it. "Some things," he often said, "don't belong in file drawers. They belong in the fire, or in the truth." He'd become something of a grandfather figure to the others, a man who once trained dogs to obey with perfection, now teaching them, through Koda's example, to listen with heart. The transformation wasn't overnight. It had taken a year of hard days, false starts, and early mornings. Camilla had thought at first that they would train dogs, but what happened here was quieter, more sacred. They didn't teach the animals, they let the animals teach them. Each week, a new soul walked through the gate dragging some invisible chain: guilt, grief, silence. And Koda, though older, still sensed them all. He no longer ran, but he didn't need to. He would simply walk beside the broken until they remembered how to stand. One man had written in his exit survey, "No one here asked me what happened. The dog just knew." By summer's end, Solace Ridge had become more than a program. It was a living story, Dogs like Nova, Bristle, and Rowan descendants from various working lines were matched to veterans based not on records, but on resonance. Sometimes the pairings didn't make sense on paper, but paper never told the whole story. Maya painted murals in the barn. One wall bore Koda's image beside the words. He didn't follow commands. He followed hearts. Another mural showed a dog placing its paw over a soldier's chest. No caption. It didn't need one. One evening, Camilla sat on the porch alone. Koda rested beside her, his breath slow, steady. The sun bled gold across the ridge. Down the hill, laughter and footsteps faded into the barn for dinner. She looked down at her companion. "You knew," she whispered, "from the beginning." Koda didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the wood. It was enough. The meadow behind Solace Ridge stretched like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. Golden light filtered through the cottonwoods, casting soft, dappled shadows over the field. The air was thick with silence, but not the heavy kind. It was the kind you didn't want to break, the kind that felt sacred. Camilla stood near the edge, clipboard in hand, boots dusted from the morning's chores. 6 folding chairs had been set up beneath a makeshift awning. 6 veterans sat quietly, each with different eyes, different pain, but the same hesitant hope. To their left, 6 rescue dogs waited behind a low fence, mismatched in size, breed, and temperament, but united in one thing. They had survived. Koda lay nearby, front paws crossed like a sentinel at ease. He wasn't here to perform, just to witness. Jonah stepped forward first, his voice soft but steady. "We don't assign dogs here," he said. "We don't match based on history medals or trauma profiles. We let them choose." A murmur of uncertainty moved through the group. One man chuckled under his breath, arms crossed in disbelief. Another, a woman with faded army fatigues and a cane resting beside her, just stared at the dirt. Then Camilla opened the gate. The first to move was a wiry black mutt named Echo, ears too big for his head. He trotted past 2 chairs, paused, then walked straight to a man named Rivera, a former medic with burn scars running down both arms. Echo didn't lick or bark. He just leaned his body gently against Rivera's knee. Rivera didn't move. Not at first. Then he exhaled and smiled. Next came Bristle, a tan shepherd mix with one cloudy eye and a limp from a car accident. She meandered slowly, tail stiff, cautious. But when she reached the chair of Thompson, an Air Force vet, who hadn't spoken a word all week, she curled into a ball at his feet, nose pressed to the laces of his boots. Thompson's hand trembled, and then softly he bent forward, his forehead touching hers. He didn't speak, but he wept. Camilla moved between the pairs quietly, sometimes kneeling to guide a hand, sometimes saying nothing at all, because often the dog spoke loudest in silence. By the time the 4th dog, Nova, full of nervous energy, found her place beside a young woman named Delane, the mood had shifted. The weight had lifted, laughter cracked open somewhere in the back. It was Rogers, the skeptic, the loud one who had chuckled earlier. He now sat cross-legged on the grass with a puppy sprawled across his lap like a weighted blanket. His head was tilted back in full-throated laughter, the kind that made Maya look up from the porch and whisper, "That's what it's supposed to sound like." The 6th match didn't happen right away. A brindled shepherd named Flint paced, indecisive. He looked from chair to chair. The last veteran petty officer, Jules, shifted awkwardly. He had arrived late, had almost backed out twice. Now Flint stood in front of him, unmoving. Jules met his eyes. For one long second, neither blinked. Then Flint walked forward and, without hesitation, placed both front paws into Jules's lap. Heavy, grounded. Jules didn't flinch. He didn't smile. But something inside him, something long boarded up, shifted. "I'm still here," he whispered. Not sure if he meant the dog or himself. Jonah called it the click. Not like a command clicker, but that invisible moment when soul met soul. When the broken pieces in two beings lined up like puzzle edges that had always belonged. Camilla called it something else. "Recognition," she said, "like they see each other's ghosts and agree not to be afraid of them." Maya took photos quietly from the barn window, documenting each pair, not for press, not for promotion, but because years from now, when someone asked if healing was possible, they'd have proof. A blurry image of a scarred man and a one-eyed dog lying on their sides, breathing together. A woman stroking her dog's ear as if it were a rosary bead. A veteran who hadn't laughed in years, with his hands full of fur, face tilted toward the sun. That night, they lit a fire outside the barn. Camilla sat between Jonah and Jeremiah, a coffee mug in hand, and watched as the 6 veterans shared their first meal at the long wooden table. The dogs, worn out from emotion and interaction, lay like shadows beneath their feet. No one spoke of war. No one needed to. Koda wandered through the firelight, stopping to sniff a boot, nudge a hand, press his head lightly into a lap. The dog that once had no name, no home, and no hope was now the compass for everything they were building. Camilla looked out into the night sky. 6 dogs, 6 people, 6 second chances. It wasn't a miracle. It was work. Daily, silent, slow work. But tonight, they had started something real. And that was more than enough. There are sunsets, and then there are endings that feel like beginnings. From the top of the ridge behind the barn, the world unfurled in golden waves. The light stretched across the land like an open hand, soft, steady, forgiving. Below, the valley glowed with amber warmth. The scent of dry grass and wood smoke drifted in the cooling air. Camilla stood still, boots planted in the dirt. One hand rested on Koda's back, the other holding the brim of her old hat to her chest. Her breaths came slow, measured, not out of pain, not anymore, but out of reverence. Koda sat at her side, pressed against her leg, the way he always had when she needed to remember she wasn't alone. She looked down at him and smiled, her voice barely more than a breath. "We didn't just survive. We gave them a place to come home to." It hadn't been easy. Not building the center, not gathering the right hands to help, not convincing other veterans skeptical, numb, armored in silence that what they needed might have 4 legs and no words at all. But it had happened, quietly, then all at once. Jonah had helped design the therapy program, drawing from his father's legacy and his own scars. Jeremiah, once a ghost in assisted living, now taught workshops on trust and history and the unspoken language between trauma and touch. And Maya, bright-eyed, notebooks full, was becoming the kind of girl her mother would have been proud of. She didn't flinch at hard stories anymore. She leaned into them. Sometimes she told them better than Camilla ever could. From the ridge, Camilla could see the entire property. The paddocks, the kennel, the 2 barns, one old and breathing with memory, one new and humming with hope. The circle of firewood chairs out back where stories spilled like water, unforced, unfiltered. Some laughter, some tears, always received with quiet understanding. And just beyond the gravel drive, framed by weathered cedar posts, the new hand-carved sign stood tall against the dusk. Camilla stepped forward and sat on the edge of the bluff. The land fell away gently beneath her, but she didn't feel the old dizziness anymore. No trembling hands, no flashbacks. Not here. Koda lay down beside her, head resting on her boot. "You remember that night," she murmured, "when I found you in the canyon?" Koda blinked slowly, ears flicking once in the breeze. "I didn't think I could save anything, not even myself. But you looked at me like I still had something left." She reached down and scratched behind his ear, the spot he pretended not to love. "You didn't come trained. You weren't polished. But you chose me." The sun dipped lower. She thought of the 6 new pairs in the bunkhouse, of Maya and Jonah inside, already planning the next intake, of how different this place had become from what it once was. This used to be a hiding place. Now it was a home. She felt Koda shift. Not to move away, but to lean closer. A firm, grounding pressure. Her eyes welled, not from sorrow, but from something rarer, gratitude that had nowhere to go except outward. "I used to be afraid of the sound of my own breathing," she said, "but now, when you're next to me, it just feels like life." Far below, lights blinked on in the barn. A few dogs barked, short, content warnings, the kind that said, "All is well, we're here." Koda lifted his head, alert, then relaxed again. He wasn't on duty. He was home. They sat there together, woman and dog. As the last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the ridge, the wind picked up. Camilla wrapped her arm around Koda's shoulders, her voice one final whisper. "You were never just a rescue. You were the reason we found our way back." Down in the valley, the words on the sign caught the last light and glowed like embers. "Solace Ridge, where healing begins." In a world that often rushes past quiet wounds, stories like Camilla and Koda's remind us that healing doesn't always roar. It sometimes walks on 4 legs and waits patiently at our side. This is more than just a story about a German shepherd who saved a woman's life. It's about how animals, especially those often overlooked or cast aside, can become anchors for the lost, bridges for the broken, and mirrors for the silent pain we carry. German shepherds like Koda are more than companions. They're listeners when words fail, protectors when the world overwhelms, and teachers of presence, loyalty, and love. This story invites us to see the power in second chances, the courage in vulnerability, and the beauty of bonds that don't require explanation. If you've ever been touched by an animal's quiet understanding, you know sometimes they rescue us more than we ever rescue them. Solace Ridge may be fictional, but its truth is real. Every creature deserves a place to come home to, and every heart can heal, especially when love leads the way. Thank you for watching. And if you believe in stories that heal, don't forget to share this one.